Hello, dear listener. Let me take you back to a moment that changed everything, and no, it didn't happen in some grand way. No spotlight, no music swelling in the background. Just me, standing in the middle of a quiet craft store on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was only there to escape the drizzle and maybe sip on a latte from the cafe inside. I had no grand plans, certainly not the plan to stumble into a lifelong passion. But then, I saw it. A basket near the register, overflowing with soft, colorful skeins of yarn. Reds, blues, buttery creams. They looked like cozy clouds you could hold in your hands. I reached out and picked one up. A warm, heathered gray. Soft as a whisper. Something about it calmed me. The feel of it, the gentle weight. The label said, wool blend, for scarves, sweaters, and soul soothing. That last word made me pause. Soul soothing. Was my soul in need of soothing? Maybe it was. Next to the basket were a pair of bamboo knitting needles and a beginner's guide. Yes, you can knit. It felt like a sign. I bought them all. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, YouTube tutorials open on my tablet, fumbling through my first wobbly stitches. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But my hands were moving, and my heart, well, it was quiet. Peaceful. Maybe for the first time in a long while. And that, right there, was the beginning. The first stitch. The first smile. The first time I realized that knitting might just be more than a hobby. So, about that first knitting project. It was supposed to be a scarf, simple enough, right? Just rows and rows of the same stitch. No shaping, no counting, no problem. Or so I thought. I picked that soft gray yarn I'd fallen in love with, cast on a few stitches, okay, like 20. I had no clue what I was doing, and got to work. Every row was a new adventure. Loops got dropped, stitches got added without warning, and the whole thing looked like it had survived a small tornado by the time I was halfway through. And yet, I kept going. Each evening, I'd curl up in my chair, needles clacking, tea steaming by my side. Even when I messed up, I didn't stop. I just kept knitting, row by wonky row. By the time I finished, the scarf was, how do I say this nicely, a mess. One end was wider than the other. There were holes where there shouldn't be. It curled at the edges. And yet, it was beautiful to me. Why? Because that scarf carried something no store-bought one ever could, effort. Intention. Imperfection woven together with persistence. It held the quiet of those evenings, the warmth of trying something new, and the beginning of a gentler relationship with myself. I still have it. I never wear it out, but I'll never throw it away. Because every time I look at that uneven, hole-ridden scarf, I remember something important. Progress doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be yours. Life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Just a few months after I started knitting, my world turned upside down. My aunt, who was like a second mom to me, passed away suddenly. No warning, no time to prepare. Just, gone. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, funeral plans, and quiet sobs behind closed doors. I felt like I was floating, numb, disconnected, like my emotions had short-circuited. I didn't know what to do with my hands, or with my heart. Then I saw my knitting bag, tucked in the corner like it was waiting for me. I picked it up and started working on something. I don't even remember what, to be honest. Maybe a scarf, maybe just rows of nothing in particular. But stitch by stitch, row by row, I started to feel grounded again. Knitting became my anchor in that storm. When I couldn't find the words to talk to anyone, I let the needles speak for me. When my chest felt tight with grief, I focused on the rhythm, knit, purl, breathe, knit, purl, breathe. It didn't erase the pain. Of course it didn't. But it held me. Gave me something to hold on to. I'd sit by the window, same spot, different ache, and just knit my way through the hurt. Slowly. Quietly. tenderly. And here's the thing. That was the first time I realized knitting wasn't just a hobby. It was therapy. A thread of peace in the chaos. It was a regular Saturday morning. Chilly. Overcast. The kind of day that begs for oversized sweaters and cinnamon lattes. So, I grabbed my knitting bag and headed to my favorite corner cafe, a cozy spot with big windows and even bigger mugs. I'd gotten used to bringing my knitting out in public by then. At first, I was shy about it, worried people would stare or think it was weird. But over time, I stopped caring. My hands needed to move, and my heart needed the calm. So there I was, sipping my latte and working on a chunky purple hat when I heard it. "Excuse me, is that the moss stitch?" I looked up, and there she was. A woman in her 60s, silver hair swept into a bun, eyes full of that "I know that stitch too" sparkle. We ended up sharing that table for 2 hours. Her name was Carol. She'd been knitting since she was 12, back when her grandmother taught her on a farm in Vermont. She told me how she knit through her divorce, through chemo, through the pandemic, how every scarf and sweater in her house had a story woven into it. And I told her mine. About the disaster scarf. About my aunt. About how knitting had become something sacred to me. We laughed. We cried. We swapped patterns. By the time we parted, she'd invited me to her knitting circle, Thursday nights, bring snacks. It was the first time I felt like part of a community, not just someone learning to loop yarn, but someone belonging. Funny how 2 sticks and a ball of yarn can turn into a bridge between strangers. Thursday night came faster than I expected. I stood outside the little community center where Carol's knitting circle met, hands sweaty, heart thumping. You'd think I was walking into a job interview or giving a speech or something. But nope, just a room full of knitters. So why was I so nervous? Maybe it was that old voice in my head, the one that whispers, "You don't belong here." I wasn't an expert. I didn't know fancy stitches or the history of fibers. What if they all looked at my projects and politely smiled like, "Bless your heart"? I almost turned around. But then, I thought about that first skein of yarn. That rainy day. That scarf full of mistakes and meaning. I'd come this far, I could walk through one door. So I did. And inside? Magic. Laughter. Stories. Needles clicking in every direction. One woman was knitting a sweater with a pattern so complicated it looked like a puzzle. Another was crocheting little stuffed animals, amigurumi, she called them. Carol waved me over like I was already family. No judgment. No pressure. Just open hearts and open yarn bags. By the end of the night, I was showing someone how to cast on, me. The person who once couldn't tell the front of a stitch from the back. I left with a full heart, a half-finished hat, and a feeling I hadn't known in a while, belonging. Knitting had started as something personal, but now? It was something shared. Let me introduce you to the gang. Thursday nights became my favorite part of the week, not just for the yarn, though yes, there was a lot of yarn, but for the people. Each one brought something to the circle, not just patterns, but personality. There was Marcia, the unofficial queen of the group. She wore shawls like royalty and could knit lace blindfolded, probably. She had this way of saying, "darling," that made you feel instantly at home. Her laugh? Like a warm quilt. Then there was Anita, a retired kindergarten teacher with a yarn stash that could fill a garage, and did. She specialized in baby blankets and gossip. If someone had a secret crush or a neighbor acting shady, Anita knew. Dan was the quiet one, mid-30s, beard, headphones around his neck. He mostly knit socks. Perfect ones. He said knitting helped with his anxiety. "I don't talk much," he said one evening, "but I show up." That's enough, right? We all nodded. Because it was. Carol, of course, always brought snacks. And wisdom. The way you handle your yarn, she once told me, says a lot about how you handle life. That stuck with me. Me? I was still learning. Still frogging rows and restarting projects. But no one minded. They'd say, "Oh, is that garter stitch?" even when it was clearly just a tangled mess. That's love, right? But here's the magic: every time we sat down together, we weren't just making things, we were mending things. Loneliness. Loss. Boredom. Worry. Each loop on the needle was a reminder that we were still creating, still caring. For the yarn, for the craft, for each other. It started with one sentence. Marcia looked up from her lace shawl one Thursday night and said, "Wouldn't it be lovely if we knit something, for someone else?" The room got quiet. Not in a bad way, in that, "Wait, that's a beautiful idea," way. Carol leaned forward. "You mean like a charity project?" "Exactly that." We started tossing around ideas: hats for cancer patients, scarves for shelters, little mittens for kids in need. Within minutes, we had a plan: Operation Warmth. Anita brought in a giant basket and declared it the giving pile. "Whatever we finish, toss it in. We'll donate everything by the first snow." And just like that, our circle had a new thread of purpose. Knitting changed. It wasn't just for fun anymore, it was for others. We picked up our needles with a different kind of energy. More focused. More joyful. You could feel it in the air, the stitches felt lighter, somehow. Dan started cranking out socks like a machine, bold colors, wild stripes. "Someone out there needs warm feet and a little fun," he said with a grin. Marcia's shawls turned into thick, cozy scarves. Anita's baby blankets became lap throws for nursing homes. Even I, with my still iffy tension and endless unraveling, finished 4 hats. They weren't perfect. But they were warm. And they were made with heart. When the first snow came, we had 2 laundry baskets full of handmade gifts, every single item touched by someone who cared. We didn't just knit that winter. We warmed the world, one stitch at a time. At first, knitting was something I did after the day was over, a way to wind down, to quiet the noise. But slowly, it started showing up everywhere. I found myself reaching for my needles in the morning, before the coffee even finished brewing. Just a few rows. A soft, simple rhythm to set the tone for the day. Better than scrolling through my phone. Better than the news. On lunch breaks, I'd knit a few lines while waiting for soup to warm. In line at the pharmacy, I'd mentally count stitches instead of getting impatient. During long calls, my fingers would move while I listened, and somehow, I listened better. Knitting slowed me down in the best way. You know that feeling when the world's spinning too fast? When your to-do list feels like a wall closing in? Knitting cracked a little window in that wall. Gave me space to breathe. And emotionally? It became my safe place. When I was stressed, I knit. When I was sad, I knit. When I was proud, bored, frustrated, grateful, I knit. It didn't fix everything. But it gave me something to hold. Something to do with my hands while my heart sorted itself out. One night, Carol said, "You know, knitting doesn't just make sweaters. It makes peace." And she was right. Every loop, a breath. Every stitch, a step forward. Every project, a little act of care, even when the world felt rough around the edges. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was digging through my yarn bin, trying to find the right shade of blue for a baby blanket. Nothing dramatic. No lightning bolt. No applause. Just a regular moment, until it wasn't. I held a skein of soft sky blue in my hands, ran my fingers over it, and thought, this'll be perfect for a feather and fan pattern. And then I froze. Wait a minute, a feather and fan pattern? When did I learn that? When did I start thinking in patterns instead of panic? I laughed out loud. Like, truly laughed. Right there in my living room, surrounded by yarn and bits of lint. Somewhere along the way, without realizing it, I had become a knitter. Not a dabbler. Not a maybe I'll quit soon kind of knitter. But a real one. With favorite needles. With project bags. With a mental list of yarn stores I visit just to look, but always leave with something. I knew how to fix dropped stitches. I knew how to read patterns. I even knew the difference between fingering weight and worsted. I had opinions. And I'd earned every bit of it, one shaky scarf, one torn-up swatch, one long night of frogging at a time. I stood there for a moment, that blue skein pressed to my chest, and I swear I felt it, not just pride, but peace. The kind that comes from growing into something slowly, lovingly, and all on your own terms. If you'd told me a few years ago that I'd fall in love with sticks and string, I probably would have laughed. I didn't grow up with crafty hands. I didn't have a patient grandmother teaching me by the fireplace. I didn't think I had the time for something so slow. But now? I can't imagine my life without it. Knitting has become more than a hobby. It's a rhythm. A refuge. A way to care for others, and for myself. It's taught me patience. Resilience. The value of quiet persistence. And above all, the beauty of embracing imperfection. I've made scarves full of mistakes, hats that came out a little lopsided, and one cardigan that lives forever in my closet because boy, was it ambitious. But each one carries a story, of where I was, how I felt, and what I needed in that moment. Every stitch is a piece of me. And here's the best part, knitting never asks you to be perfect. It just asks you to show up. To hold the yarn. To try again. That's the lesson I'll carry forever. So if you've ever thought about learning, if your hands feel restless, or your heart feels heavy, or you just want something that's yours, pick up the needles. Get the yarn. Start the loop. You don't need to be good. You just need to begin. Because sometimes, what starts as a scarf becomes a lifeline. And sometimes, what starts as a quiet hobby becomes a new way to breathe. Thanks for sitting with me. For listening. For knitting along, in your own way.